Hey, yo, it's Guido coming at you with some DCS. Back to it. I've had a lot of footage from DCS, just haven't got around to editing any of it. This one was fairly recently, though. I think we did this a few months ago where we did kind of a basic BFM mission. This is the same thing, a little bit less of the random talking in between because we're using Discord as opposed to SRS or something like that. I like SRS, but sometimes it doesn't work so good and it's a bit hard to understand. So we're just going to use Discord between myself and Stump. I wanted to give a little bit of a explanation about what's going on. Then we're going to watch the mission, and then I'm going to watch the mission again, but I'll break it down and I'll talk about some things, real world stuff that's going on there as well, or how it would be different from the real world kind of ideas. We tried to run this as close to possible as a real world training BFM mission. So DCS, VR games, we're doing it in VR, but airplane games in general, whether it's Microsoft or DCS or IL2, Sturmovik, or any of those types of games, it's really fun to get up there, mix it up, shoot people down, all that kind of stuff. And to some extent, there's a lot of real world isms there. I'll just give one example. We're going to use a 10,000 foot floor, which means if we go below 10,000 feet, it's a training stop. In the real world, the floor is the floor, and it's self-critiquing when you hit it. The cool thing in games like this, or even simulations, is we can dance around with the floors. We can use terrain like we're here in Nevada, flying out of Dreamland, and if we hit a mountain, then we have a good laugh, and the other guy wins, that kind of thing. Well, in training, we can't really afford that. So we set floors, and floors have safety margins, and they'll either be 5 or 10,000 feet above the ground or the water, depending on lots of different situations. I.e., trainees usually have a higher floor than the experienced pilots will. Over water, it could be a little different. There's low-level rules. There's a lot of rules, guys. All right, so a lot of that stuff, that real-world training isms, okay, those are for safety of flight. So we don't run around killing ourselves in training, which is a lesson we've learned in blood over the years. What's interesting about that is, as you are a real fighter pilot and you do most of your flying in that type of environment, it becomes kind of second nature to pay attention to those things. You become very good at it, but at the same time, there's a potential for some negative training if you were to find yourself in the real world situation. I think the positives outweigh the negatives in that. Obviously, I'm not advocating that we would use the floor as the floor in training. That's not the point, but that's kind of the difference between the thing. We'll talk about a few more of those kinds of ideas as well when I break it down after we watch the whole mission. Now let me set the stage for the mission itself. We're flying out of the Nevada map, Dreamland, Tonopah, I believe. Two ship of Eagles. The configuration, as you can see, the one over there is clean. We've got an AMRAAM and 2 missiles. Really, I needed to put 2 AMRAAMs so we could keep the symmetry correct. That's a whole other subject, but we've got 1 AMRAAM and 2 heaters, 1 on each side. I did that so we didn't have any fuselage blanking issues right there, and obviously a full gun. So 13,500 pounds. We're not really gonna, let me back that up just a little bit. We did a bit of a brief. I wish I'd have recorded that, but I forgot to do it. And we touched on some of the areas. So a standard brief would be about an hour before the flight. You're gonna take about 15 minutes for admin. That's going out, coming back, any spins, the BFM setups, the objectives of the mission, all that kinds of stuff. And then you'd spend about 45 minutes on the actual BFM, briefing each setup and how it's going to go, all that good stuff, and about an hour or so it would take that. So we are going to take off out of Dreamland. We're going to fly runway heading, basically go out, do about 4 setups, and come back. And that's it, man. That 13,500 pounds are gone in that time. 4 whole setups. And we didn't even have to drive very far, because there's no real airspace for us to deal with in DCS. The thing you will not see here, obviously, is all of the ground ops it takes to start, talking to ground, taxiing, getting to the runway, getting armed up with the EOR crew, talking to tower, getting clear on the runway, and then that will kind of catch up at the runway, but then I won't be talking to ATC, I will not be talking to tower, I will not be talking to departure, I won't be talking to whatever controlling agency owns the airspace. Some places you're actually going to talk to a center to get to your airspace, depending on where you are and what the routing is and where your airspace is and everything else. And then the reverse flow coming back, dealing with all that. You'll see us fly, but I won't be talking. So there'd be some dead space in here. You'd be like, wow, nothing really going on. Usually that's kind of where you're doing a lot of coordinating with the ATC. So there would be many more radio calls in there. There are some MilSim communities out there that do that stuff. They'll have all those agencies and they'll kind of do that. And usually they don't work it into like a training mission, right? The fun of DCS and all that generally for people is to go out and actually shoot missiles and have bullets come out of your airplane and things blow up and you do a mission and all that good stuff. But training missions, obviously, you don't want to go down shooting down your buddies or your squadron mates, because that just wouldn't be a very good idea, would it? All right, I'm going to get out of the way. We're going to watch this mission straight through, and when I come back, we'll watch it again, but I'll break it down as we go, and we'll talk about some of those things. So take it away, Guido and Stump. You ready to roll?
Yep, I'm ready.
All right.
Interesting. I didn't realize the pilot in your airplane, I could see their skull move.
Yeah, the skull moves, yeah. All right, one's ready.
Two's ready.
Run them up.
Two's ready. Two's ready.
Take 10 seconds. I don't.
I miss having V sub C in the HUD.
Yes. We'll be
Just at the
850, 850, 300 to 350 climb.
Yep.
Lead on the right.
Lead right.
One has lead left tactical.
Two.
Reference Reference 180. One's 12-1 squared bounced.
2's 12-4 square bounce.
Push it up, stand by first GX, 14,000.
2.
One's ready.
2's ready.
First GX, in place, 180 left, go. Reference 360. One's ready.
2's ready.
Second GX, in place, 180 left, go. One terminate.
2 terminate.
Reference 180. One's 11-3 squared bounce.
2's 11-6 square bounce.
First setup, 6,000 foot offensive for number 2.
2.
Level off 180, push it up. One's ready.
2's ready.
Check 45 left.
Alright, locked, reverse, 2 miles, 4 aspect. He's off. $7,000. 6,000, fights on. Ah. Alright, gunning. Nice jank.
One knock it off.
2 knock it off.
Easy left hand turn, tuck to the left side.
There you go. Alright, 2.
One's blind. Visual.
Alright.
Tack to the left side. Let's reference 040.
2.
One's 9.5 squared balanced.
2's 9.9 squared mouse.
Next setup, 6,000 foot offensive for number 1.
2.
Reference 040.
Two.
Push it up. One's ready.
Two's ready.
Check 45 left. Locked. 8,000. 7,000. 6,000 fights on. Gun.
Well, that was interesting. Uh-oh.
Recover.
Recovering.
One, knock it off.
Two, knock it off.
Roll out right. Visuals your right. 3 o'clock.
Visual.
Level.
Visual.
230.
Yep. I think departs a little too easily.
One's 8.1.
He's 8.2.
Next setup, high aspect BFM.
Two.
Check left, 210. New bingo 3.5.
Two.
Push it up. One's ready.
Two's ready.
Check 45 away. Turn in. Fights on, fights on.
Over G, continue.
Copy. Box 3.
Oh, that's bullshit. Box 3.
Check floor.
Ah, 4 kill, knock it off.
1 knock it off.
2 knock it off.
Check left, reference 360. Visuals
2
your left 9 o'clock level. Flare.
visual.
Reference 010. 1 is 5.4.
2 is 5.3.
Next setup will be turn in high aspect BFM at 15,000.
Okay.
Check right 030. One's ready.
2's ready.
Turn in, fights on. Snap.
Ah, that was poor. There we go.
Check 4.
Yeah, way
Nice.
low. 4. Watch the floor.
1 knock it off.
2 knock it off.
One's coming back right 090. Blind.
2's visual, right 3 o'clock, couple miles.
Visual. Turn it back left 360. Knock it off.
2.
One's fence out.
2's fenced out.
One CMD's off. Slowing 300. Cleared rejoin right side.
2.
One's 4.0.
2's 3.9.
Battle damage check.
Boom. You're good.
Get lead right.
2's lead right.
Good. One has lead right. Cleared route.
2.
Easy left hand turn. Cleared fingertip. An easy right-hand turn. Leveling off and rolling out. Initial.
8.
Take 5 seconds. See ya.
2.
One's base gear, stop right.
Use base gear, stop right.
Clearing cold. How'd the landing go?
Good. I survived. Actually, right
Excellent.
behind you.
Excellent. My takeoff was not so good.
Yeah, I practiced a few earlier tonight just to try to tune my rudders a little bit. I'm still struggling with where to set that curve. Get them effective, but not too effective early on is
Yeah.
what they need. So don't need much.
That's pretty cool, man.
Yeah, it worked out well.
Alrighty then. So, obviously a long video. I thought it's kind of interesting though, as I was thinking about how long this thing's going to go, and obviously I'm going to be yapping a lot during this one for the same amount of time, or longer, because the mission plus my yapping if I end up pausing it. But on the one hand, it's long for a YouTube video. On the other hand, if you consider the length of that entire mission just to do some BFM. It was what, 45 minutes, maybe a little bit less total right there, and you've burned through 10,000 pounds of fuel, plus maybe a little bit more. So they are not very long missions, and we try to pack as much training into them as we can. All right, so we're at the end of the runway, back to the beginning of the video right there. Like I said, you're not seeing the ground ops, you're not seeing the taxi, you're not hearing the ATC and all that stuff. We'd be at the end of the runway here. There would be guys running around arming us up, so our EOR crew. And once they take a look at the jet, make sure all the pins are pulled and everything's correct, there's no leaks, etc. The tires look good, all the things that they check, then they'll clear off and we'll be ready to go. Obviously in DCS, and I don't know of any VR games that really do this very well, in the real world I could look over at number 2 and I can give him all kinds of visual signals. We can't do that here, so everything's going to be over the radio. All right, let's get started here. Ready to roll? You ready to roll?
Yep, ready.
Yep, I'm ready.
All right. The ready to roll
Interesting.
Call.
I realized the pilot in your airplane, I could see their skull move.
Yeah, the skull moves. Yeah. That was a discussion I was just having. You can see it a little bit, and some of the pilot animations are better than others in DCS depending on the module that you've got. The 15C tends to just kind of have jerky movements. You can basically see them look around, and that's about it. There's no hands or anything either. So we're going to do a 2-ship run-up echelon, one on one side, take the middle of your side of the runway, the other on the other side, the middle of their runway. They're going to come up about the line abreast of the wing route anti-K light is roughly the position that number 2 will go to. You're going to see a very bad takeoff because I didn't practice any at all, and my controls are sometimes a little touchy. So I'm going to have everyone's ready.
She's ready.
Run them up.
She's ready.
So we'll run them up. Taking a look at the engine stack, make sure there's nothing goofy going on with that. They're all in alignment and the correct parameters.
She's ready.
And then I flail. So 10 seconds was briefed. I don't actually have to say that on the radio. And we're going to have a big issue right here. I would have aborted this takeoff in real life, but you know, it's DCS, so off we go. Terrible, terrible. I would have scared the hell out of number 2 on that one. Probably the SOF in the tower would have been freaking out as well. Not to mention my tires might not be in such great shape after all of that. Oh, takeoff gears flaps up. We're going to switch from tower to departure, so I'll be talking to departure right now, telling them that I'm airborne with a 2-ship and what my intentions are, where I'm going. By the way, if you hear banging and whatnot, it's because I'm living in a construction zone. Can't be helped. Checking 6 back there to see where number 2 is. That's a good flight lead habit to always check on number 2. As a former instructor, you're really kind of oversensitized to that because you need to make sure that
I miss having V sub C in the
you need to make sure that students doing and is where they need to be. V sub C in the HUD is something that DCS doesn't have. That lets you know what your closure is, relative closure between you and their radar contact. I tell them I'm going to hold 850, 300, or 350 on the departure. Should be 350 knots, 850 FTIT. That's something that would be in the brief. Not something that would be necessarily briefed in the air or said. Sometimes we'll give that information out. It just depends, but that's kind of a standard technique for the Eagle. You can see that we're offset to the left just a little bit. That's one of the problems with DCS and the VR mirror stuff. It's actually recording out of one eyeball or the other one in the VR headset, so it offsets it. You can tell it to do it from both, but it has trouble putting it together and it really looks funky. So most of the videos you see where guys are doing the VR, you'll see that little offset there in the HUD because you're actually off the left eyeball. Okay, here comes number 2. He's coming aboard. So we'll take off. He will rejoin to probably route, maybe fingertip, depends what the brief was.
Lead right.
So I didn't say it, but he's getting a systems check coming aboard per the brief, which means he'll lock me up, check my IFF and a couple other things, look at his systems. And then once he goes by, I give him the lead on the right, and now I'll do the same thing. I'm just checking my different auto lacks, make sure that my heater gets a tone, it's cooling, all that good stuff. Training mission, obviously with live missiles, you'd want to be way more careful about some of these things. We do have immortality on in the game. That way people don't blow up. Okay, so once I get my system checked, I'm going to come back. When I has lead left tactical. So I've told him I have the lead on the left tactical. Reference 180. You can voice the various positions you want them in. There are
He's 12-4 square balance.
There are visual signals. Fuel checks will be something you do constantly. It's kind of a back and forth between, not kind of, but it is. First GX 14,000. Setting up the GX now. We're going to start at 14,000. Usually you start at 18,000, but I'm just expediting. So it has to do with the airspace that you're using. So back to the fuel checks, you're going to do that quite often in between every setup on departure before you come back downhill on arrival, and maybe even a little closer into the field just to get a general idea of what yours and your wingman's fuels are. Because if now all of a sudden, say I said 11.5 and he said 7.5 or something very different, we got a problem, right? It's one way to kind of keep each other in check. You should be checking your fuel in your own cockpit, obviously, but there's many kind of fail-safe things that we do like that. 18,000 is the general GX, so once you take off, I'd have been talking to departure, get into the airspace, get cleared in the airspace. A lot of other calls in there would have been made. Because we're DCS, we're just flying off runway heading, and we're just going to fight out here off to the, I think it's south. I believe we took off the south flow. Off to, what's my heading? Yes, 180. There you go. Hey. South flow off of the runway there. We're going to fight out to the south of the airfield and then just come back in. So the floor of the airspace is going to be 10,000 feet today. That's what we're going to use. We're going to set up at 18,000 feet. I'll show you that in a minute. This GX we're going to do at 14,000. First GX is going to be about 4 Gs. One's ready.
Two's ready.
First GX in place, 180. So we're both going to do a 180-degree turn. I'm going to pull to about 4 Gs. It's an energy sustaining, slightly nose low pull just to kind of get into the G strain warmed up just a little bit. Make sure that the first time you jump onto a lot of Gs isn't the first time you've done it that day. Let's get a little bit of strain going on into the lower quadrant, into the abdomen, into the legs, things like that. Roll out, 180 out. That was a mill power pull. One's ready.
Two's ready.
Second GX. This will be a max AB. Go. Maybe not quite enough nose low right there. We do want to get to about 6, no more than 7 Gs right there, but we'll get into the G strain. Clearly I'm not doing it. I'm sitting in my office chair like I am right now. That's a nice thing about VR, right? I don't have to actually pull the Gs. One terminate. Damn good thing, because reference 180. That would be a bit tougher at this point in my life. Now we're going to climb. You'll notice I'm checking number 2, where his position constantly, looking at the engine stack and the fuel. One's 11.3 square balance. To be honest though,
Two's 11.6.
You'll notice I don't check my engine instruments nearly as much as I should. Why? Because I'm flying DCS and everything's perfect. I'm not going to have obviously a problem, but my cross check would have to definitely include more engine. First setup, 6,000 foot offensive for number 2.
Two.
Okay, so the first one's going to be a 6,000 foot offensive for number 2. You'll say as lead, you will tell what the next maneuver is going to be. He will respond as 2. You've heard him say that multiple times. Most of the calls that number 1 makes, 2 only has to say 2 to acknowledge. That's all we're looking for, unless there's something else involved in the call right there. So you'll hear him say 2 a lot, because just acknowledging what I just said, that he understands what we're doing. We're going to go to 18,000 feet. 400 to 420 knots is what we're looking for. So we'll keep checking number 2, make sure everything's copacetic over there. You would be checking your airspace. This particular version of the Eagle doesn't have level off one. It doesn't have an MPCD or moving map on it, so we're not worrying too much about that. But you'd be doing that station keeping if you're actually flying a jet. Push it up. That means get yourself to the right airspeed.
He's ready.
Two's ready.
Check 45 left. All right, so the setups on this, my sticks are massive, so I don't know if I even get them into the doggone camera, but what we're looking for is, as you are looking back defensive, you want the offensive aircraft, which is going to be number 2 back there, to be at about a 4 aspect behind you, pointing at you, needle nose, and then you're going to pull or ease off the pull to give him that 4 aspect. So we're trying to give a basic standard setup, and this is not necessarily something you're going to see in DCS. Entries into BFM, most people like to do high aspect because it's neutral, but you got rules on whether you can take a lot of altitude delta, what the speeds are, all that kind of thing when you're in training. The reason we do it this way in the Eagle, we're going to be at the same relative airspeed. We're going to have a 4 aspect on an offensive setup, whether it's 9,000, 6,000, or 3,000 feet. We're going to start the fight at 9,000 or 6,000 or 3,000 feet. That's where the maneuvering starts. The reason we have all these rules is we want to set up the same basic parameters at the beginning so that the analysis of the BFM from there is a bit easier. If he is at 200 and I come in at 400, that changes things quite a bit. And we're trying to make it, I don't want to say the word fair, that's not necessarily what I'm talking about, but we're trying to set it up so that the desired learning objectives are clearer. Let's put it that way. It is a slight weakness, in my opinion, based on the way we train, that we always set these things up in very specific parameters. Different entries for BFM, high aspect, 90 degrees, whatever the case may be, that you might see in DCS in a game when you're fighting somebody, depending on how your intercept went. That's extremely important to know how to deal with that. But what we're trying to train people to do, and we have a limited amount of training time to do it, is have them understand the basics of BFM. And if every setup was randomly set up and different, sometimes learning the lessons can be a little more difficult. That being said, the weakness part I'm talking about is there is a jump from this very canned standard BFM setup to the highly dynamic any kind of entry BFM. There's a lot of space in between there that we don't look into too much, that we don't delve into too much. And a lot of it has just plain to do with we don't have the time necessarily to do it. We don't have the hours. You only fly so much in the jet every month. You're doing upgrades. There's always somebody trying to learn how to fly. There's always another upgrade to flight lead or force ship or whatever the case may be. So we have a situation of limited resources, essentially. Time, jets, fuel, etc., money, all that kind of stuff. Not to mention that we're always flying against the same, not always, but quite often, most often, flying against the same airframe. It's an F-15 via an F-15, probably basically the same loadout, okay? Sometimes you'll fly against a jet that has a tank on it or 2 tanks, but we try not to do that because that's a huge disadvantage for that person. We're trying to get as much training for each guy who's flying as we can, all that stuff. So it's a very interesting discussion well beyond the scope of what we're doing here. But that's kind of an overarching idea of why it is that we do it this way. And then when we get into debrief, because we start at the same parameters, it's easier to see the mistakes and the good and the bad that people do, right? I didn't have 100 extra knots than he did, okay? We started the same. So your maneuvers from that starting point really count, and it's much easier to suss out the learning points, all right? All right, here we go. So there he is in the spec.
Locked, reverse, 2 miles, 4
aspect is
aspects.
actually the little pedo thing for the seat. I don't know if I'll turn my head enough to see that yet. No, probably not. I get my nose up a little
He's
bit.
off.
He said he's off. That means I was pulling too tight. He probably had a 5 aspect there.
7,000.
Okay, so
7,000,
he's getting close. 6. I'm ready.
6,000, fight's on.
So the fights on and knock it off is very important in training. We need to know when we are fighting and when we are not fighting. And the standard act for that is fights on and a knock it off. You heard him say 6,000 fights on, and that's the offender's job to do so. Or on high aspect, it's number 1's job when you merge to call the fights on. That means that everyone understands we are now maneuvering in a tactical situation. All the spins are in play and safety, etc. But once there's a knock it off, we stop that and we get away from each other. We get back into either climbing or back to our blocks, depending on what we're doing in that particular fight. And then we're no longer fighting, because it wouldn't do for one guy to be raging around fighting and the other guy doing admin stuff. That's a safety of flight issue, and there goes the drill for you guys right there. The brake turn was okay on that. You heard me get into a little bit of beeper. By the way, we are playing by the G rules, okay? You can't go out there in the real world and just over G the shit out of the jet, right? You hear over G, over G, over G. You're bending the piss out of it. It's fun to do in the game. I know a lot of people, that's how they fly on the BFM. You can pull the wings off at times in DCS, but in the real world, you don't go around over Gumbying the jet like crazy, because then it pisses off maintenance pretty bad, as well as the boss. All right. 10,000 foot floor, right? So I only have so much altitude to work with. I got to pay attention to the floor, hitting about 13,000. There he is, in lag, but I'm going to start to see his nose rotate on me as I'm looking back. You're going to start to see this start to happen right here. Should be happening in a minute. I'm in the beeper there for high AOA. Some flares, good. I'm at least thinking about it. And look at his nose start to come around on me right here. Dude. All right, he's pointing, and I'm seeing bottom of jet. This is a late jink, by the way. He's already shooting.
All
All right, gunning. Nice jink.
One way, we'll go the other way. There goes some bullets. That's not good. One knock it off.
Two knock it off.
Two knock it off.
Okay, so we have a knock it off, right? I call the knock it off. He calls the knock. Why did I call knock it off? Well, the training event is over, right? The learning objective has been met. He started offensive. We got to the floor. He's still offensive. That's the objective of the BFM, to keep him back there, keep him in an offensive position. Don't overshoot. Don't allow reversals. Don't hit the ground. All that good stuff. So the objective of that particular setup had been met. There was no reason to waste any more gas groveling around on the ground. Now, you would do that in the game if you're just raging around shooting each other. Somebody's going to run out of gas and crash, or someone's going to get a shot in there. I may have actually eaten a couple of those shells because we're immortal. I didn't take those hits in the game, or at least this particular part of the game right here. But it's time to knock it off and reset this thing up. Easy left-hand turn, tuck to the left
There
side.
you go.
There you go.
Two.
All right, two.
One's blind. Visual.
All right.
See him down there. Tack to the left side. Let's reference 040.
Two.
Two.
You will see with the what I'll call gamer BFM, and that's not a pejorative, but you will see a lot of videos where guys are just flopping like
9
fish and
points.
making all kinds of moves, and that's highly effective. It's keeping them
5
from
square
being
mouths.
hit.
She's 9.9 square.
She's
miles.
9.9 square mil.
It's also a way to hit the ground pretty easily if you're not doing it very, very correctly. But I'll tell you, some of those
Next
guys are
setup,
really
6,000
pretty damn
foot
good at it.
offensive for number one.
Two.
Reference 040.
Two.
Two.
So we're going to do all the admin now. We've knocked it off. We're going to climb back up. That does take some time. I'm going to check my fuel. He's going to check his. We'll check our engines. We'll make sure everything's good to go. We'll do the station keeping for the airspace, making sure that we're not going out of the airspace or anything like that. There hasn't been any drilling until I started recording, by the way. Every single time. All right. Back to 18,000. Push it up. Push it up. That means get your airspeed back. Get ready. We're about to set up the next setup. One's ready.
She's ready.
So this will be a
He's ready.
6,000 foot offensive
45
for
left.
me. Check 95 left. I'll use vert scan. I'll get a radar lock. Locked. Go to guns. I'll start to get some aspect angle
8,000.
information.
7,000.
A little bit too far in lead.
6,000 fights
Okay,
up.
roll the lag. Line of sight starts to develop. Lift vector on. Push him towards the HUD. You probably should have done some vertical right there. Gun. But I used a bunch of energy to do that. Now, Stump's going to actually try to do some rudder right here. He's fighting his controls. And that's actually not bad. It was late, but it was not a bad vertical maneuver. But watch what happens because he actually departs the aircraft.
Well, that was
Yeah, so
interesting.
that's a departure. Recover. I'll call recover.
Recovering.
Recovering.
Obviously, in the real world, that's an immediate knock it off. If you depart the aircraft out there in BFM, you're going to call a knock it off. The problem is you don't know if it was ham fisting, okay, not flying within the parameters of the aerospace vehicle, or if you actually have some kind of issue, hard over rudder, something isn't working right, your controls aren't right, whatever the case may be. Fuel imbalance could be that as well. So you would absolutely knock that off and go, you know what, we got to go back and figure this thing out. And once we look at the tapes and look at the jet, we'll know, was it me or was it something else? Because we don't want to actually have a jet problem to go, oh, that's fine, reset it up and do it again. It's DCS. So we are going to allow some of these things to get, that I'm just sort of all over the place. I finally get some shots in them. And we do a floor save, so knock it off. Neither one of us goes through.
Do knock it off.
Gotta have a little,
Right.
gotta have some fun, right?
Visuals your
It's DCS.
right, 3 o'clock.
Right, so same
Visual.
same discussion right there. I stayed offensive.
Yep.
I got a shot on him. There's no sense in groveling and
I
pissing
think the part's a little too
the
easy.
rest of our fuel away.
One's 8.1.
He's 8.2.
He's 8.2.
We've used about
Next setup, high aspect.
2/3 of our fuel.
Two.
Now we're going to do a high aspect set.
Check left.
All the
210.
checking stuff is to keep us basically line abreast. So if he gets slung back, I can check that way and bring him more line abreast. That helps with the setups. I'm doing a little bit of station keeping right there, looking at the field, see how far away we are. That's something I would be able to see normally on the moving map, but this version, older version of the Eagle doesn't have anything like that. Checking the fuel, checking the wingman. New bingo 3.5. I actually didn't have an old bingo, but that's just the way I said it. That would have been briefed, would have been on the card. We really could do a bingo about 2.5 for how close we are to the field.
One's ready.
All right, so we'll push it up to 18,000.
Tuesday.
For these
45
setups,
away.
it's going to be called a butterfly setup. We'll go 45 away from each other, and then we're going to turn in for a high aspect merge.
Turn in.
Both of us will get radar locks. We need to be visual through this whole thing. All right, there won't be any face shots on a training mission like this. You could
Lights.
take a heater or an AMRAM on these just to practice the switchology, but you're not going to call any kills on that. The purpose of the high aspect BFM, much like the perch, which is what the thing we did before was called, is at the merge, the fight's on, and then your maneuvering matters from there.
On fights
So I'll
on.
make that call, and there we go. 2-circle fight. Watching him go around the corner. Keep him near the horizon, maybe a little too nose low. Notice how now he is well above the horizon right there. So 2-circle fight coming around. We're not going to bother going into
Over G
TACV or
continue.
anything with this. We'll just sort of discuss it as we go. We'll do that another day. Okay, both of us keeping our airspeed pretty good. Remember, we started 18,000, so we only got to 10,000 before we get to the floor. Obviously, in the game, we could go down a route around the mountains. You've seen that. We've done that before. But this is more the training environment right here. A little bit of beeper. I think Stump actually over-G's in one of these.
Fox 3.
So we get a Fox 3 there. I don't think I pickled it. I actually just called it. That's what we would do on the radio, just so the other guy knows that he's in the parameters right there. He can kind of assess, and we'll look at it in the debrief, like, okay, yeah, I was not tightening down enough, or I extended too much and allowed you to get that whiz.
Oh, that's bullshit.
Fox 3.
Fox 3.
Okay, we're both groveling around on the floor.
Check floor.
Ah.
Ah.
Floor kill, knock it off.
Floor kill,
Right,
knock
that's
it
a
off.
great one right there. You notice I was at 10,000. I looked at him and he was well lower than me. That's a flight lead thing, instructor thing. Like, dude, check the floor. You're below the floor, and they go, yep, knock it off floor. Now, ideally, you catch it as you go through the floor. That's the job of each guy in his cockpit. But the job of the flight lead or instructor of the flight right there is to kind of pay attention to everything that's going on and everyone that's involved right there.
One knock it off. One knock it off.
Knock it off.
Two knock it off.
Check left, reference 360. Visuals
Shoot.
your left 9 o'clock level. Flare.
Visual.
All
Visual.
techniques for getting the flight back
Reference
together.
010. One is 5.4.
Choose 5 point.
Choose 5.3.
So we don't really have a lot of gas left.
Next setup will be turn in high aspect BFM at 15,000.
So I've truncated some of the things. We're actually just
Okay.
going to start the fight from present position, turn in, fights on, as opposed to go over 45. We only have about 2,000 pounds of fuel, maybe 1,900 or so to deal with, so we're not going to have a whole lot of swirling to be able to do, but we can squeeze out one more, at least the initial setup.
Check right 030.
Initial merge and maybe a turn or two before we have to knock it off and head back. And I'll just elect to start it at 15,000 instead of 18 because it's just going to take a bunch more time and fuel to climb up to 18.
One's ready.
He's ready.
Two's ready.
Turn in, fights on. Maybe a little vert scan, get that guy locked up. I'm going to give up a little turning room, go one circle with him right here, just to make a different view. All right, this is interesting right here, fellas. That right there is a bubble violation by miles. If you actually saw that in the air, you would be scared. That is as close to a near hit as you can get. So what should have happened there is, as we come around, once I should not be pulling him into the HUD right now. And this is a training thing. It goes back to what I talked about earlier about how I don't want to necessarily say this is negative training, but it kind of is, because these face shots are valid shots, but the problem with them is the closure. They're extremely dangerous. The history of these through World War I, World War II, etc. is not great. There's a lot of mid-air collisions caused by these things. So we are we're really negative on these in training. So once you get high aspect, if you're pulling a guy into the HUD, you're wrong. You're wrong, especially for a gunshot. All right. Now we see this all the time in DCS. Face shots like this and snaps and things, high aspect snaps are very effective. It can be very effective, especially if you've got the hands and the good hand-eye coordination, all that good stuff. In a training environment, though, this is no bad, right? You'd get a talking to if you continued to pull a guy in the HUD like this, and we both had a close pass. And I don't think. I think it was me pulling him into the HUD because it looked like maybe Stump was trying to get away from my dumbass. No, he was shooting too. So look at that. That's bad. 1,000 feet bubble is the other adversary filling up the reticle right here. Can we see that? Yeah, we can see it on the screen. That would be 1,000 feet. Look how big he is. He's several times the size of the reticle. So he's well inside a 1,000-foot bubble. He's I don't know what we're going to pass at, but it's probably 50 feet, maybe less. I don't even know if it's 50 feet. It was, see how fast that was close. All right. So that was bad juju right there. But it's fun in the game, right?
That was poor. There we go. Yeah, way
Nice.
low.
4.
Four.
Touch the floor.
Watch the floor.
One knock it
Two
off.
that off.
Two knock it off.
One's coming back right. So he hit the floor. I didn't. Blind. Provided I didn't eat shots.
Two's visual, right, 3 o'clock,
That's a
couple
win for me.
miles.
Visual. Turn it back left. 360. Knock it off.
Two.
One's fence out.
Two steps down.
I didn't need
Two's
another
fenced
knock
out.
it off. One CMD's off. Slowing 300. Clear region. Okay, now we're back into admin phase, right? I'd be talking
Two.
to whoever's controlling the airspace. One's telling, hey, we're RTB, 2 ship. Direct Tonopah.
3.9.
Two's 3.9.
Actually, that's not Tonopah. Groom Lake is, Tonopah's somewhere else. Groom Lake. Why can't I think of what it is? Anyway, doesn't matter. It's got a different code name for red flag and stuff. It'll come to Creech. There it is. Creech. Direct Creech. So checking the nav right there. So talking to the controlling agency, who will then eventually switch me over to either center if we have to transit through some center airspace before we get to approach, or approach at Creech. To be honest, I don't remember who controls it in Vegas. Whether it's actually maybe Vegas approach or Nellis approach, don't know. Maybe they have their own approach, no, unknown to me. But it would be some kind of approach, who will then, once you get closer, switch you over to tower, and you'd be discussing, hey, I want to go initial, or I need an ILS for 2 ship, non-standard, whatever it is you're going to do to come back. So we'll get number 2 coming aboard here. Damage check.
Boom.
And I tell him battle damage check, so he's going to come in. You'll see him go high on the left side, cross underneath, go high on the right side, and he's looking for leaks, damage, panels missing, panels open, anything goofy, bent, wrong on the jet. We call it a battle damage check. Clearly, we weren't in an actual battle, but
Good.
if things were
You're
shooting
good.
at you, that would be
Yeah,
even
lead
more
right.
important.
Lead right.
Two's lead right.
So we'll give him the lead right. That's all via the radio. Otherwise, it would be a signal like that. 2 becomes 1, and he would just go. Wouldn't be anything said necessarily. Battle damage check is the gun, but we can't do that. I'm a little far away right here, but we'll go underneath his jet. Make sure he's not leaking any fluid. No panels are open. There's nothing bent. A little far away as well. I'm going to go high. So we've looked at all sides of his jet. And as number 1 then, since I'm going to lead us back, we'll go ahead. Good, 1 at lead right. Cleared route. So we'll push him off the route. Have to say it on the radio. That's what,
Easy
something like
left-hand
3
turn.
ship lengths to 500 feet roughly for us. Every jet's a little bit different with a lot of these formations. The formation, what's the word I'm looking for? The visual signs for formation, that's not the word, I can't think of what it is right now. That's what happens when you get old. Are different for each jet, right? The positions that you put yourself in
out.
and the visual references, there's the word, the visual references that you're going to use on each jet are a little bit different. You can generally put yourself in the right position, you know, fingertips, fingertip, roots, root. Exactly where that is based on the airplane. Slightly different for each one of them.
Cleared
I'm going to do a
fingertip.
lot of telling him where to be. And I'm also going to call my turns a bit. The DCS is a little bit, depending on how you have your
Easy right-hand turn.
controls set up, dead spots, all that stuff, can make the controls a little bit squirrely. But you can fly good formation in DCS if you practice a little bit with your controls and get used to how they work. You notice Stump's in a pretty good position this whole way, but I'm calling the whole thing easy right-hand turn. All right, I'm rolling out, leveling off. The last thing you want to do when you're flying as number 1 in formation is to be abrupt.
Leveling off and rolling out.
So even if you're not saying things, everything needs to be smooth as number 1 when you've got somebody in fingertip. Otherwise, you're going to not have anyone in fingertip pretty quickly. So I'd say he's slung aft just a little bit. Easy to do. I see a lot of videos with guys flying formation and they're behind. Really, fingertip is pretty close to line abreast. Not quite. It's not helmet to helmet lined up, but the other guy's helmet should be at about in the Eagle,
Initial.
your right anti-K, wing root anti-K.
8.
So we're going to do 10 seconds. He's in good position
5
there.
seconds. See ya.
He's about 6,500 here. 2,000 to 2,500 above the runway. AGL is what you're looking for an overhead. I guess it's really 15 to 2,000. I know that the Navy does 1,000-foot overheads for carrier brakes, things like that. The Air Force is going to be 15 to 2,000. 45 degrees off the runway. Gear flaps are down.
One's base gear, stop right.
Base gear, stop right. That's the truncated. And notice we didn't use any call signs here. I just call myself one. I'm Eagle 1, Gonzo 1, Knife 1, whatever call sign you're going to use right there.
Use base
Knife
gear,
1,
so-
gear
Use base
down,
gear,
right
stop,
base,
right.
full stop would be the whole rigmarole. Some of that is local rules driven. And this is an angling final. Check this out. So I'm not well lined up on the middle of the runway. I'm pointing at it, but I'm not lined up on it. So I rolled out a little too early. I needed to continue that turn a little more to lean over to the left or ease off that turn, sorry, to get over to the left. And I'm sort of going to accept this kind of crummy landing on the right side of the runway. I'm also drug in a little bit. It's not gross, but it's not perfect. We are going to land kind of brick 10, though. Not bad. And I was closer to the middle when I landed. Now I'm letting myself sort of wander off to the right. That's something you don't want to do. Fight to be in the right position on the runway. This, again, my excuse is getting used to the controls. And my rudders, I have the... don't remember which version of the rudder. I have them, but they're not... I don't know. They're a little squirrely. I got all kinds of excuses. So I need to get over to the cold side of the runway. That's the left side in this case. Okay, so I'm telling him I'm going cold because the reason we do this is if number 2 has an issue, brakes too fast, whatever, he's overrunning me. I get to the cold side, he'll take the hot side, and if he has to go past me, he will. But that way we've deconflicted, and that's the standard. Number 1, the guy in the lead will get over to the cold side once he has his jet under control. If I had someone ahead of me on the cold side, once I was under control, I would get the cold side and then help anyone behind me if they needed that runway to the right of us. All right, well, there you go. So we'd be talking to Tower that whole time. They'd be talking about any other aircraft that are in the pattern. That can complicate things. We were able to just come on, pitch out, and land. You might do low approaches to get a few low approaches if you had a little extra gas. That happens quite a bit. Generally, you didn't do touch and goes, single seat. So it depends on the airplanes and whatnot. You would do that in dual place aircraft, i.e. a D model. So you've got an instructor in the back. You got a student in the front. You could do touch and goes in that case, but as a general rule, single seat, we didn't do touch and goes. It would just be a low approach, and full stops would be when you'd obviously put the wheels onto the ground. But that changes now and again, and it really has to do with the aircraft and its mission. Although, to be honest, I don't know if anyone else really does single pilot touch and go. It's just not a required thing. It's an extra stress on the jet. You know, if you're in training and you got a student and you need to see them land and do all that, by all means, then that's good, T-38s. And if you're training, say, the D model in the Eagle. But if you're an operational unit, smashing the gear onto the ground over and over again is probably a waste of time, right? You do some low approaches, the approach look good, put the jet on the ground, hey, awesome. All right, fellas, there you go. A lot of talking. That was a very long video. Hope you enjoyed that. If you have any questions, chuck them down there below. But I wanted to give you a general idea of what the training mission looked like. Quite different than just obviously a DCS mission. There's a lot of goodness, I think, in both of those. There's a whole discussion about whether something like this, not necessarily just DCS, but virtual stuff, what its real applicability to real world capability is. I happen to think it has a significant amount. I'm not saying somebody playing DCS is going to become a fighter pilot just by playing DCS or any VR game, whether it's Microsoft Simulator or whatever. But if you have a simulation that is pretty damn close, I think there's some goodness in some basic procedures there, right? I'm able to take all that knowledge from the jet and the way we flew it and pretty closely simulate that in DCS right here, which I think is a pretty cool capability. Obviously, if simulators had no capability, then air forces around the world would not spend a lot of money buying them to help train their guys, right? We can say, well, this doesn't have the fidelity, it doesn't have the right this, that, and the other, but the concept is still solid. Otherwise, we wouldn't be spending lots of money on simulators. All right, fellas, that is all I've got. Have a great one. See ya.